Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Adam, and this is Commander Tax. Alright, here we are in our next Commander Dive. This one is featuring the Infamous Cruelclaw. And he is a 1, a black, and a red pip. He is a Weasel Mercenary that reads Menace. When the Infamous Cruelclaw deals combat damage to a player, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. You may cast that card by discarding a card rather than paying its mana cost. This card is crazy good, guys. I think this is going to be a really fun commander, and I can't wait to tell you guys more about him. Our first category today is big mana. Alright, so because you can play anything for free by discarding a card, if you're going to discard a card, you want to get something of serious value, right? So let's look at some really big stompers that we can get out for free. The first one is Phyrexian Fleshgorger. He's a 7 cost, but he also has Prototype for 1 and 2 black pips, so he could be a 3/3 or he could be a 7/5. The way Prototype works is you may cast this spell with a different mana cost, color, and size. It keeps its abilities and types. So it keeps its types, it keeps the other text, but it's a 3/3 instead of a 7/5. The text on the card reads, Menace, Lifelink, Ward, pay life equal to Phyrexian Fleshgorger's power. So the cool thing about this card is going to be, if we just happen to draw him, we can pay him out for 3. But if we access him with Cruelclaw's ability, we can drop him as the 7/5. So it gives us some flexibility there. Next up, we have Archfiend of Despair. He is 6 and 2 black pips, a demon, flying. Your opponents can't gain life. Already great. At the beginning of each end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life that player lost this turn. Awesome ability. So basically, you can swing in with this, hit one person, and then everybody at the table takes that damage. So if you hit with this guy for 6, everybody at the table takes 6. Great card. Love the art on this. The fact that it's a demon is really sick and cool. Next up, we have Gorex the Tomb Shell. Dude, black has some of the best stompy creatures out there. It's 6 and 2 black pips, a zombie turtle. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you may exile any number of creature cards from your graveyard. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each card exiled that way. So if you wanted to, if you had this in your hand, you could reduce the cost. So again, it gives us that flexibility. We can take a few creatures out of our graveyard if we wanted to make this just cost 5. But he's a 4/4 and he's got Death Touch. And whenever it attacks or dies, choose a card at random, exile with Gorex, and put that card into its owner's hand. So this is a great recursion ability. Typically, you're going to want to play this from your hand, but even if you end up playing it from Cruelclaw, still a decent little card. Next up, we have Lotleth Giant, 6 and a black. When Lotleth Giant enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target opponent for each creature card in your graveyard. So this is, I love this keyword. I've never seen this keyword before. I'm not familiar with it, Undergrowth, but based on the number of creatures, so we're in a bit of a mill theme. So we're going to have a lot of creatures, hopefully, in our graveyard, and so this could do massive damage. Next up, we have Mycus the Unhallowed. 3 and 3 black pips. It's a zombie cleric with Intimidate. Whenever a human deals damage to you, destroy it. Other non-human creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Undying. So basically, Undying is when a creature with Undying dies. If it had no 1/1 counters on it, return to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Great card. Next up, we have Bladewing, Deathless Tyrant. 5, a black and a red. It's a dragon skeleton. It's got flying haste. When it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, for each creature card in your graveyard, create a 2/2 black zombie knight creature token with Menace. Great card. Very popular commander in its own right. And it's just going to give us a bunch of dudes if we have a lot of cards in our graveyard. Next up, we have Witch King Skyscourge. So this wouldn't be a Commander Tax video without one Lord of the Rings card. So this is a 5, a black and a red, a Wraith Noble. So he's going to be our only Wraith in this deck, but it's still going to be good. So flying, whenever you attack with one or more Wraiths, exile the top X cards to your library, where X is the total power because he's a 5/5. Even if you're just hitting with him, you're exiling 5 cards, which is good enough. You may play those cards this turn, and it has Undying on it as well. Next up, we have Sheoldred Whispering One. So this is a bit of a salty card. At 5 and 2 black pips, it's a Praetor with Swamp Walk. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So a great little bit of recursion. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. That's the salty part. It's a 6/6, just great, big stomping card. And that is it for the big mana category. Let's move on to our next category, which is going to be discard payoffs. All right, our first, so because we are, getting cards off of the top of our library and we're having to discard a card, why not have some creatures that give you a benefit when you discard that card? So the first one here is an old card. It's Surly Badgesaur. He's 3 and a red pip. He's a badger dinosaur, great creature type. Whenever you discard a creature card, put a 1/1 counter on Surly Badgesaur. Whenever you discard a land card, create a treasure token. Whenever you discard a non-creature, non-land card, Surly Badgesaur fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. Just a great payoff for discarding cards out of your hand. Next up, we have Glinthorn Buccaneer. This is 1 and 2 red pips, Minotaur Pirate. Haste, whenever you discard a card, Glinthorn Buccaneer deals 1 damage to each opponent. So just a little ping, a little 2/4 pinger, right? You can pay 2, discard a card, draw a card, activate only if Glinthorn Buccaneer is attacking. So it's a boast ability before they have boast. Next up, we have Bag of Holding. Whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. You can pay 2, tap this, draw a card, then discard a card. But here's the real kicker here. So for 4, you can tap it, sacrifice Bag of Holding, return all cards exiled with Bag of Holding to their owner's hand. So basically what this means is, like, as things are going to your graveyard, as you're discarding them, it goes under the Bag of Holding, then you pay 4 and tap it, and all those cards will come back to your hand. A great little way of getting around having to discard stuff. Next up, we have Brass's Tunnel Grinder. It's 2 and a red pip. It's a legendary artifact. When it enters the battlefield, discard any number of cards, then draw that many cards +1. So if you just had 1 land in your hand, you could discard it, and then you're going to draw 2 cards, which is great. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, put a boar counter on Brass's Tunnel Grinder. Then if there are 3 or more boar counters on it, remove those counters and transform it. So to descend means to put a permanent card in your graveyard. This then will transform. Teku's Land, the Searing Rift. Legendary land, Cave. You can tap it for red. Whenever you cast a permanent spell using mana produced by Teku's, the Searing Rift, discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. So if you put one of these huge stompers from our hand, you're going to then be able to discover something else. So another way to get free cards at the top of our library. Next up, we have Inti, Seneschal of the Sun. It's a human knight for 1 and a red. Whenever you attack, you may discard a card. So not the best, but when you do, put a 1/1 counter on target attacking creature. It gains trample until end of turn. This is the great part. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until your next end step. So with Cruelclaw, if you discard something to play something, you then get to draw a card to replace the card that you're discarding. So just a great payoff for having to discard something. So if you could discard a land, maybe you get a creature and you can play it that turn. Next up, we have Containment Construct. It's just 2 generic. Whenever you discard a card, you may exile that card from your graveyard. If you do, you may play that card this turn. So this is a great artifact in that if you discard something from your hand, instead of going to the graveyard, it goes to exile, and you still get to play it. So if it's one of those things like Cruelclaw, you attack, you play something for free, then you discard a card. Now that card goes to exile, and now you get to play that card too. So it's just a way of saving the card. It's almost like you didn't discard it at all. Next up, we have Braylon Skyshark Rider, 3 and a red pip, human shaman. It does partner with Shabraz the Sky Shark, but I'm just putting this in the 99. We're not caring about that. Whenever you discard a card, put a 1/1 counter on Braylon Sky Shark Rider, and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So it's another pinger, and this is going to get bigger over time. It's just a great card. And then it's got something about a shark. We don't have any sharks in this deck. We don't care about that. Next up, we have Bone Miser for 4 and a black. Whenever you discard a creature card, create a 2/2 zombie token. So just again, a token generator. Whenever we're discarding something from our hand, we're just going to get a zombie. Whenever you discard a land, you get to add 2 black pips. So a great little, one-time thing when you discard a land. Whenever you discard a non-creature, non-land card, draw a card. So this is a great card in this deck. A lot of value, just like Badge of Sword. Next up, we have Conspiracy Theorist. It's 1 and a red. It's a human shaman. 2/2. When Conspiracy Theorist attacks, you may pay 1, discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So that's another way of drawing, but that's not really what we care about. This is the part, whenever you discard 1 or more non-land cards, you may exile one of them from your graveyard. If you do, you may cast it this turn. So if on a previous turn you discarded something, you weren't able to play it, you can now discard a second card, and then you could play the one card that you weren't able to play that you really wanted to. So nice little ability. You do have to have the mana, so you still have to pay for the card in your graveyard, and then you got to pay 1 to do this. So, but still, for 2 mana, that's a great ability and a great payoff. All right, that's it for that category. Let's move on to our next one. Our next category is going to be draw. All right, so first up, we have Sensei's Divining Top. It is 1 generic pip. It's an artifact. You can pay 1 to look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back in any order. You could tap this, draw a card, then put Sensei's Divining Top on top of its owner's library. So this allows us to look at the top 3 cards, and then when we attack with Cruelclaw and we get through, then we know what we're getting. We can look if, it's land, something, right? So we want that something. We're going to put that on top, put the 2 lands underneath it, and that way when he attacks, we're just going to get that top card and just get to play it, and we don't lose our lands. Next up, we have Hoarder's Overflow. This is a new card from Bloomburrow. It's an enchantment. When Hoarder's Flow enters, and whenever you expend 4, that means spend 4 total mana, put a stash counter on it. Then you can pay 2, sacrifice this, discard your hand, then draw cards equal to the number of stash counters on Hoarder's Overflow. So basically, what you're doing is every time you spend 4 mana, you put a little counter on this enchantment, and then let's say you basically play everything out of your hand, and then you're discarding, right? So you have nothing in your hand, but now we've got, let's say, 4 counters on this. You sack it, and you draw 4 cards. So a great little enchantment to give us really a great amount of value for just 2 mana. Next up, we have Gix Yawgmoth Praetor. It's 1 and 2 black pips. It's a Phyrexian Praetor. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay 1 life. If they do, they draw a card. So basically, you can swing with this or another creature. If it gets through, then you can pay a life and draw a card. Great draw card. It's a very expensive card because of that reason, but you could also pay 4 and 3 black pips. I've never done this. Discard X cards. Exile the top X cards of target opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from among cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. So actually really strong ability. I just usually never get there. Next up, we have Scroll Rack. So very similar to Sensei's Dividing Top. It's 2 generic pips. You pay 1. You exile any number of cards from your hand face down. So you put your hand over here, probably your whole hand. Put that many cards to the top of your library into your hand, right? Then look at the exile cards and put them on top of your library in any order. So it allows you to exchange your hand for cards off the top of your library. So if you basically, like, say you got a really big stomper and you want to get it out for free with Cruelclaw, you can basically draw cards and then you put that in any, your hand in any order. Let's say you're just going to put that one on top. So great little library trick for this deck. Next up, we have Connecting the Dots. Whenever a creature you control attacks, exile the top card of your library face down. So you're just going to probably put it under this enchantment. Then you can pay 2, discard your hand, sacrifice Connecting the Dots, put all cards exiled with Connecting the Dots into their owner's hand. So I've seen this. You can draw like 7 cards really easy. This is a really underrated card, right? So every time you attack, you're taking something off the top of your library and you're tucking into this card, right? So let's say, you could do this. You could just start this on turn 2, and by turn 7, you may have, 10 cards underneath here, and then you just pay 2 and you get to draw 10 cards. Like, this is crazy good, and not enough people are playing it. Next up, we have Wild Wasteland. It's 2 and a red pip. It's from the Fallout series. It's an enchantment. You skip your draw step. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. So it's basically impulse card draw. You get 2 cards each turn instead of 1. And this will come into play when we get into one of our next categories. But that is it for the draw category. Now we have Exile payoffs. So this is going to be why we have Wild Wastelands. So the first one is Keeper of Secrets. It's 5 and a red pip. It is a demon. It says first strike, haste. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, Keeper of Secret deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to target opponent. And it's a 6/4, so it's got a big body on it. So what are we doing here? Because Cruelclaw is making us exile cards, and we're not milling them into our graveyard. Basically, you're casting that from exile. When you cast one of these giant creatures off the top of our library, you're going to actually, if you have this in play, you're going to do that much damage. So if it's, let's say, the skeleton dragon that costs 7, you're going to do 7 damage to somebody's face, which is really strong. Next up, we have Wild Magic Sorcerer. The first spell you cast from exile each turn has Cascade. So when Wild Sorcerer gets put into play, you could get something, let's say with Cruelclaw, let's say you get Bladewing Deathless Tyrant and it costs 7. You then cascade, and you can cascade into something like Bone Miser. So this can be a great little combo piece for your deck. Alright, now we have Passionate Archaeologist. It's 1 and a red pip. Commander creatures you own have, whenever you cast a spell from exile, this creature deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to target opponent. So the way this is going to work is that when Cruelclaw gets through, you're then going to be able to do damage to somebody else and get another trigger. So you can get multiple triggers. As long as you have cards to discard, you're going to get that many cards off the top of your library. A really good card. Okay, now we have Nefeshni. It's 5 and a red pip. It is a 4/6 flying. Whenever you cast a spell from exile, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. If it's a permanent spell, the copy gains haste, and at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this permanent. This is awesome. If you get like a giant creature that's not legendary, you're gonna get a copy of it, and you're gonna get to swing at both of them. Like that's crazy good. You're gonna do massive damage, and you're probably gonna get double the effect of whatever that card's doing. Then we have Lelia, the Blade Reforged. Is 2 and a red pip. It's a spirit warrior with haste. Whenever it attacks, exile a top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from your library and or your graveyard, put a 1/1 counter. So this is going to get big really fast because Cruelclaw is going to hit. You're going to exile 1 card, so there's 1 counter. Then you discard a card to play it. There's 2 counters. So every turn you're going to get at least 2. If you have more of these exile cards, you're going to pump this up really fast. It's a really good piece for this deck. Okay, now we have Araxa, Empress of Mars. This is from Doctor Who. It's 2 and 2 red pips. It's an alien warrior. Trample, Battlecry. When this creature attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. And then it has Paradox. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, so let's say exile, create a 2/2 alien warrior creature token. So this is just another way to create a bunch of tokens, and a great card to have because it allows us to get a payoff for playing stuff from exile. Next up, we have another Doctor Who card, Memory Worm. It's 1 and a red pip, and it also has Paradox. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, it deals 2 damage to target player. That player discards a card, then draws a card. You put a 1/1 counter on Memory Worm. So over time, this is going to get big. Your opponents are going to have to discard some good stuff. If you keep hitting with it, good deal. And next up is one of my most favorite cards from Doctor Who, Flaming Tyrannosaur. It's 5 and 2 red pips. It's a dinosaur with menace, and it has a picture of a dinosaur on fire. And it has Paradox. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, say exile, Flaming Tyrannosaur deals 3 damage to any target. Then put a 1/1 counter on Flaming Tyrannosaur. So you're going to get a bunch of 1/1 counters as you play more cards. It's hard to keep this on the field, I'm not going to lie, I play this a lot. I love this card. Whenever it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. I actually play this in my Kalane deck, so I'll use 7 treasures, so it'll come out as a 12/12, and then people have to make the decision, do they want to remove it and take 12 damage, or do they want to let 12/12 stay on the board? A really cool card. In this deck, it's just good value. because you're going to probably play it for free. And then if you have Wild Sorcerer out, right, you're going to cascade into something else. You're going to put a counter on this, and you're going to do 3 points of damage to somebody. All right, that is all for that category. Moving on, we have everything else. So there's only 2 cards in our everything else category. This one we have Fear, Enchant Creature. Enchant Creature has Fear. So Fear is 2 black pips, and we're going to put this on Cruelclaw just to give him an added bit of evasion. Same thing with our next one. It is 1 black pip. It's an enchantment aura. You enchant creature. Enchant creature has Intimidate. Intimidate is it can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and or creatures that share a color with it. So just added evasion there. That is it for everything else. And our last category today is recursion. Because we're going to be discarding a lot of cards and a lot of our creatures are going to be dying because Rakdos doesn't have any protection, the only way to get those things to where they can stay on the board is to use some sort of graveyard recursion. So our first one here is Coiling Rebirth. It's a new Bloomburrow card. You gift a card, which, okay, but return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then if the gift was promised and that creature isn't legendary, create a token that's a copy of that creature except it's a 1/1. So we have a lot of really powerful big creatures that aren't necessarily legendary. So having a 1/1 version of it is really good because we're playing those cards a lot of times for their effects and not so much for their bodies. So I really love this card from Bloomburrow. I think this is going to be a great commander staple, and I'm excited to see it in my own decks. I've not actually had a chance to play it yet, but a really cool card. Next up, we have Oversold Cemetery. It is 1 and a black pip. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 4 or more creature cards in your graveyard, you may return target creature from your graveyard to your hand. So this just gives us, basically, if we're discarding a lot of cards, we can discard, let's say you have 4 creatures, right, in your graveyard, then you're going to get 1 back at the beginning of your upkeep. Really great card when you're having to discard a lot. Next up, we have Shreds of Sanity. It's 2 and a red pip, so it's a sorcery that says return up to 1 target instant card and up to 1 target sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, then discard a card, exile Shreds of Sanity. So this is a great card because if we don't have any creatures in our hand and we have a really good sorcery or instant that we have to discard, this is a way to get it back, because discarding, you're not going to necessarily be able to choose all the time to discard a creature or land. So this is just a little added way to get something back. Next up, we have Grim Discovery. It's 1 and a black pip. It says choose 1 or both. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And here's the reason it's in here. Return target land card from your graveyard to your hand. So there's not a lot of ways. There's only a couple ways in Rakdos to bring back lands. If you're constantly having to discard and exile cards off the top of your deck, you may lose out on a lot of lands. So having a card like this is great. Next thing we have is Crystal Chimes. It's 3 generic pips. It's an artifact. You can pay 3 and tap this. We have over 11 enchantments in this deck. So this, you basically, after you tap it, you sacrifice this and return all enchantment cards from your graveyard to your hand. So this is a way to, again, to get something back that we wouldn't otherwise be able to. Next up, we have Chainer Nightmare Adept. It's 2, a black and a red human minion. You can discard a card. You may cast a creature spell from your graveyard this turn. So if we have an extra land in our hand, we can discard it and we can get a creature back. You can only activate it once per turn, but then whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste until your next turn. So you get to bring something back, it gains haste, you get to swing with it, and it actually doesn't get exiled. So that's pretty cool. A lot of these cards say exile it at end of turn, so this is a really strong card. Next up, we have Beacon of Unrest. It's 3 and 2 black pips. It says put target artifact or a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Shuffle Beacon of Unrest into its owner's library. So I like that you get to shuffle this back in, but it also allows you to return an artifact. So again, something that we wouldn't otherwise be able to get. So not a lot of cards that do that because we have a lot of artifacts in this deck. So this card is really good. Let's say if you had to discard your Crystal Chimes and you have 5 enchantments in your graveyard, you can go get your Crystal Chimes to then play it and then get all those back. So recursion to get another piece of recursion, but you get the point. It's just a way to get an artifact back because we have a lot of artifacts in this deck. Granted, it costs 5, but you can also go get a creature. Next up, we have Macabre Waltz is 1 and a black pip. It says return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand, then discard a card. We're already doing a lot of discarding, so this makes a bad card good, especially if you have one of these cards that say, you know, do something when you discard a card. Alright, and that is it for this Commander Dive. I hope you guys enjoyed my look at Cruelclaw. If you have time, go check out some of my other content. Thanks for swinging by. Catch you in the next one.